I've been doxxed a number of times and had my address posted and received many, many, many death threats. And most of those are, I know, total bullshit, but they're scary.
I denne episoden av Portrettpodden. Du hører på Portrettpodden, en podcast hvor jeg intervjuer mennesker som inspirerer meg, så får meg til å tenke, og så hjelper meg å forstå mer av verden jeg lever i. Mitt navn er Mats Lasse-Jangås, og sammen med min gjest, poet Olivia Gatwood, skal vi være stemmene i hodet ditt den nærmeste timen. Olivia vokste opp i Albuquerque i New Mexico, og et tilfeldig møte med slam-poesi førte hun inn i en verden som har gitt henne stor suksess og et stort publikum. Olivia har raskt blitt en av de sterkeste og klareste stemmene i vår generasjon, og et stort forbilde for mange rundt om i verden, meg selv inkludert. Derfor var det ekstra stas at vi mot slutten av fjoråret kunne sette oss ned og ta en prat sammen om poesi, feminisme, cancel culture, det å være åpen og ærlig på sosiale medier, hvordan det er å være ung kvinne og ung poet i den tiden vi lever i, og mye mer. Om denne samtalen har gitt deg den inspirasjonen du trenger til å gå ut og oppfylle dine mål, ser på det som en æresbetegnelse. Og om du liker denne episoden og ønsker at Portrettpodden skal fortsette å bringe deg flere sånne historier som Olivias, kunne du kanskje vurdert å støtte Portrettpodden på Patreon. For 100 kroner i måneden kan du komme med din helt egen ønskeliste for fremtidige gjester. Du kan få dine spørsmål stilt i løpet av episoden. Du kan høre episoden 24 timer før den slippes, og om du ønsker å ta det ett skritt lenger, får du også tilgang til videointervjuet denne episoden tar utgangspunkt i, og mye andre snacks. Ta en titt. Link ligger i beskrivelsen av denne episoden. Med det ønsker jeg dere riktig god fornøyelse, og her er Olivia Gatwood. If a story touches you, it will stay with you, haunting the places in your mind that you rarely ever visit. And I can't think of any other or any better way to introduce my next guest, one of the most powerful and inspirational poetic voices of our generation, Olivia Gatwood. How are you?
Good, thank you. Wow, I'm doing much better after that.
Good. And we started this on the right foot at least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here's hoping you feel the same way when we're done.
Yeah.
I suppose many of you might already know who you are, but just give a quick background. You're a young poet from America, grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You've written the poetry collections New American Best Friend and Life at the Party, and your novel Whoever You Are, Honey, is set to be released this year. Start off, how does a poet cope during a pandemic without losing her mind?
I think that I sometimes struggle talking about the hard parts of the pandemic because the first part of it for me was I was really privileged to be in a job that sort of lent itself to solitude. I had been living alone in a small town and was already kind of spending my days alone writing and taking breaks to surf and garden. And I just had a really solitary life that mostly existed either within the confines of my home or in the outdoors. And so when the pandemic happened, it was, jarring and scary and anxiety inducing in many ways. But for my own, because I was, worried about my family and I was worried about my friends, but for the most part, my personal life was actually sort of flourishing, which is like, I think that maybe you could say I was losing my mind a little bit by myself in my house, but it felt really exciting and like a really productive time to create because I had all this time to just be in my own head and work and think. And so, I think I've talked to a few writers during the pandemic who felt like it was sort of the perfect job to have. You know, it's like, oh, okay, if you're in an environment that's safe and you have, you know, a home that feels good, it's like, and you have your health, like it is actually quite nice, you know? So yeah, so I didn't lose my mind in a bad way, I guess I'll say that.
One way of dealing with lockdown and solitude, I suppose, is spending your time reading and listening to true crime. How does what's your mentality like? How's your mental health like after sitting alone in the dark, all alone, listening to horrible stories?
You know, after I wrote Life of the Party, I actually pretty much stopped listening to true crime for the most part, kind of unintentionally. It was sort of like I'd gotten it out of my system from writing that book. But I also, when I was living alone, was really diligent about what I consumed because it affects me so much. And so I think that it's actually not fun to be scared when you live alone, because it's not like you're sitting with your roommates, you know, jumping at every sound or whatever. It actually feels really disorienting to be so uncomfortable in your own space. And so I didn't listen to or watch a lot of true crime after I wrote Life of the Party, in part because it did really affect my mental health, and it really affected, I mean, while I was writing Life of the Party, I was in a pretty low place. And I think I needed to write it in order to crawl out of that place. But I also think once I wrote it, I was like, I don't really identify with this book anymore, you know? So it was this strength. I think that's the process, though, of putting something out into the world.
Life of the Party er Olivias andre diktsamling, og gjennom boka setter Olivia med sin sylskarpe og helt unike penn søkelys på vold, traume og mishandlinger som kvinner og kroppene deres utsettes for av gutter og menn. Så vel som hvordan samfunnet for øvrig romantiserer vold mot kvinner, og hvordan rase dessverre er en faktor i hvordan media dekker sånne saker. Et knyttneveslag i solar plexus og en oppvåkning skrevet av en ung poet som ikke viker unna, og som vet å sette ord på det vi tenker på, men ikke ønsker å snakke om.
Dab your eye, we know you like it gory. Only the blondes get a cover story. Girls go missing right around the corner, but she needs a tiara for us to mourn her. Naturally attractive, exceptionally bright. How many ways can we say the word white?
Of course, touch more on that during the course of this episode, but going back to you grew up in Albuquerque, for one who's never been outside of Europe, and when I have a poet on, I might as well ask, could you describe that town as a character?
Yes, probably. Let's think. As a character. When I think of Albuquerque, I always think of my mother once said, in Albuquerque, they wear jeans to the opera. And it's like, I guess that sort of feels really accurate. First of all, there is no opera in Albuquerque, but but if there were, people would wear jeans to it. It's such a humble city, both by choice and also by circumstance. So it feels very much like a character from Albuquerque would be a person who I think is both in a socioeconomic place where flaunting or being heavily decorated isn't in their sort of ability, but also that they don't have the desire to be that either. It doesn't feel like a person from Albuquerque is very aspirational, and I mean that in a good way. I mean, like, it doesn't feel like there's this chasing of wealth or status. I think that the people in Albuquerque very much reflect the environment in that it's isolated and at times feels really desolate and feels really empty, but is also like extremely abundant geographically. And, you know, the desert is this place that people associate with abandon, but also with like kind of mind-blowing landscapes. And so I find the people from Albuquerque, including myself, exhibit that in their personhood. So, you know, I think it feels there's a darkness to it, and also a deep specificity. I've heard people who are not from Albuquerque / New Mexico, or people who've never been, when they come, they feel like, I've heard many people, especially people from outside of the US, say it feels like the least American US city. Like it feels the least like you're in the US. And it's like, sometimes that's because it feels like Mars, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess I don't know who I just described, maybe myself, but maybe also like, I don't know. So I'm also kind of imagining like some sort of mythical figure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was sort of imagining like a punk rock Betty White.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's wrong, actually. Yeah. I think that's maybe very true. There is a big punk scene, you know, that's sort of what I grew up in. And I think Albuquerque is a pretty punk city, actually.
So how does what similarities are there between that character of Albuquerque and Olivia Gatwood?
I think that I have a darkness inside of me. I think growing up in Albuquerque is a big part of that. When you grow up in Albuquerque, because of the nature of the sort of systematic violences that affect the city, I think it's a really common experience in Albuquerque to lose people at a young age. And so I've lost a lot of people, and I think I've witnessed a lot of violence and endured a certain amount of violence. And so I think there's that. And then I also think I feel really in tune with the natural world. By nature, I just do. And I don't always live in environments that are, you know, I live in LA right now. I lived in New York for 5 years. And so I don't always live in that, but when I'm in it, I think I do feel most like myself. I think that there is a way that I'm maybe I'm more aspirational with regards to status than some of the people I love in Albuquerque, like my parents. But I think there is a part of me that will always remain fairly, you know, I'm just thinking about the fact that I've been like trying to like buy nightstands for my bed. And like, first of all, the whole thing of buying 2 identical nightstands that go on either side of your bed is like kind of a foreign concept to me, because I like grew up in a house where like mattresses were on the floor sort of thing. And so doing that alone is already out of character. But I keep just coming back to being like, why would I buy nightstands when I can just go to Home Depot and get onion crates and like put those next to my bed? It's like the same thing as these $250. Anyway, that's I think that's very Albuquerque. I have the money to buy nightstands, but it's like the part of me that grew up in this town where everything is like sort of homemade. I just am like, why would I do that? So, yeah. Yeah.
Just because you got money doesn't mean you have to spend it.
Yeah, exactly. And especially not on something like fucking nightstands.
No.
Yeah.
And just as I said, I forgot to mention before we started recording, you swear as much as you like.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The reason I wanted you to describe it is that I feel there is this sort of light-hearted darkness in your writing, is that you touch on these really serious and important topics, but you do it in such a way that everyone has sort of like a gateway drug. You have their own entrance into it, like sexual assault or the patriarchy or white middle-aged men in general, or being a young woman in America in the 21st century. That's you spin it in such a way that it's not daunting. You're able to grasp it as a reader, but you're not scared away by the magnitude of it.
That's so kind of you to say. I really appreciate that. I think that I feel like it's really important for me to have accessible work, and I think that doesn't mean it doesn't have. I don't think that means it's not smart work. I think that it means that it's forgiving, maybe, and empathetic. I don't even think that. I'm really grateful to hear you say that about Life of the Party, because I think one of the things about Life of the Party that I don't totally identify with is that I wish I had written with even more sort of nuance and forgiveness than I did. I was writing with the tools I had at the time, but I think that there is a way in which alienating readers or alienating people, I think is really counterintuitive to education. And I think education is really crucial for healing and growth and safety. And by education, I don't mean institutional education. I mean, you know, an empathetic exchanging of knowledge. And so I feel like it's really important for me to write about what I know in a way that I hope encourages conversation more than it, you know, halts it.
I also feel like topics like true crime or delving deeper into sexual assault and domestic abuse and stuff that most people might not want to talk about, but if you do it in a sort of poetic way, if you spin it in such a way that you're able to identify with the story and the characters, you're not necessarily, let's talk politics, guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're not getting a pamphlet, you know, or being shown a PowerPoint or something. It's humanizing, I think.
So trying to, not trying to put any shade on the Norwegian educational system, but having a PowerPoint presentation about sexual assault is not really, it's the thought that counts, I suppose, but it doesn't really amount to much.
It's the same. I think it's kind of the same everywhere, unfortunately. But
and of course being given by white men. So that's,
sure.
The irony is palpable.
Yes.
You've quickly become one of the most inspirational voices for, at least for our generation, and you got a great big fan base. But I'm pretty sure I read somewhere or I heard somewhere, out of context, of course, that you wanted in the beginning that your audience were misogynistic men on the internet.
Well, so I think I came up in slam poetry, which was by nature very confrontational. And so my earlier work, I think, was written from a place of anger, but also very pointed. Like I felt like when I wrote a poem, I needed to be writing it to the people that I felt like needed to learn something. So it was a lot of sort of like, just kind of confrontational poems. And I'm still proud of that work. And I still think there's value in it. What I think I also realized, and sometimes like kind of continue to realize over and over, is that, you know, I'm not like really interested in martyrdom personally. And I'm using that word hyperbolically, and I'm also not, because there were times that my work accessed a particular corner of the internet where alt-right sort of white nationalist men live, and they sort of, you know, I've been doxxed a number of times, and had my address posted and received many, many, many death threats. And most of those are, I know, total bullshit, but they're scary. And they're scary when you're on tour and you're posting your location every night. And I had a couple instances at shows where I was made to feel uncomfortable by people in the audience that felt like, oh, I don't like, is this person here to, you know, hurt me? And in the US, there's very much kind of a hysteria around active shooters and I on college campuses, that's a lot of things. So anyway, when you're getting death threats on the internet and then you're posting your location, it's not too crazy to imagine that those two things could, you know, lead to something really violent. And so I just started feeling like, you know, I'm not interested in this feeling. Like, I don't write so that I can like come to someone's university and feel scared for an hour. For what? Oh. Like, it's like just not my thing. And I applaud people who want to do that. But I just was like, I think this is writing in this way. And that's not to blame myself, but it is to say that I noticed an extreme difference when I started writing in like a tender, caring way for girls. It was like, it just like my work didn't even access these like guys. Like, so it, you know, and so it just like my life became a more joyful place after that. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure that I'm teaching anyone anything if I'm just like getting doxxed. No. You know? So I think that I spent my earlier time writing for, you know, the men who needed to hear it. And I was like, oh, those men will kill you. So no, thank you. I'm good. I'm out.
they won't listen anyway. So
yeah. So it's like, So I just sort of stopped being interested in that.
Yeah. It's crazy how when death threats cease, your quality of life goes up.
Yes, I know. I would have never assumed those two things would have any effect on each other.
No. we uncovered the great truths here in this podcast. Like I say, you become an important voice to many young girls over the years, and sort of become like a surrogate big sister, someone who sort of not watches over them. That sounds a bit creepy, but takes care of them from the pages of the book or on stage. But it wasn't always a given that you would turn to poetry because you were into soccer in high school.
Yeah. You call it football. And where Norway. Are you? Norway. Yeah. Norway. Sorry. I guess they call it football literally everywhere, but the US.
Because they mostly use the foot.
Yes, because that also, you know, makes sense. And you know, I spent a good portion of primary school in the Caribbean in Trinidad. And so spent a lot of my childhood calling it football and have sort of had to go back and forth. But yes, I played for many years, over a decade, and sort of had it. My life revolved around it, and it was, you know, really fulfilling for a while, and then wasn't. And I miss the game. I don't really miss I don't miss the politics inside of the game.
No.
But I do miss the game. So yeah, I think it actually lent itself to, when I went into slam poetry, it was competitive and strategic, and which now feels so silly to think of poetry as competitive and strategic. Actually, it feels kind of like really like morose to me, but at the time I really understood that language. So it was actually a kind of a nice transition.
Yeah. Liker du det du hører så langt? Hvis du støtter Portrettpodden på Patreon for så litt som 100 kroner i måneden, kan du få den her og alle fremtidige episoder 24 timer før den legges ut. Du kan også ønske deg din drømmegjest og få dine spørsmål stilt i en episode. Link ligger i beskrivelsen av denne episoden. Takk for oppmerksomheten, og nå Tilbake til Olivia Gatwood. Looking beyond the misogynistic men on the internet and focusing more on the nice audience you have these days. Like I said, you're an important voice to many young girls out there. Are you comfortable being labeled a role model?
Yeah, I am. I feel like the audience I have, I'm really lucky to have such a kind audience. I really have such a kind readership, and there are times when I think as my perspectives on the world have changed, I've also at times felt at odds with parts of my readership, not obviously all of them, but specifically around abolition and how to mitigate being both a woman that advocates for, safety and accountability and like, wants to fight against sexual violence while also being a person that does not want to advocate for prison. And those two things I think feel very opposite to a lot of people. And so as my opinions and perspectives on that have changed, I've found at times that parts of my readership, I think, feel sort of let down by that. But that's a relationship, that's like, I'm a person, and I'm a person who started getting an audience when I was quite young, and, my perspectives are always changing. So I am comfortable being a role model because I think that's also important for young people to see is people grappling, with who they've been and who they are. And I really valued role models when I was younger. I really looked up to certain women, and I remember really vividly like what I wanted from them and what I craved and how valuable their insight was. And so if I can offer that, I feel really grateful to do that. I don't feel very much pressure also because luckily I've never been the most censored person. So I'm not struggling with the like Disney child star becoming sexual pipeline. I've sort of always been fairly, PG-13, but I think I feel good. I think I feel good about being a role model.
Yeah. Just to misquote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, but you're comfortable with that role, at least.
And I do feel responsibility. And I also think I used to know this woman, and she said to me, like, it's not the worst thing in the world to disappoint people. And she used to talk about how when you're young, like disappointing people feels like the worst, like you're so afraid of it. And I feel like disappointing people is actually really important for us to get. Being disappointed is really important for people, because it's like, that doesn't need to be synonymous with hatred or disposal or a lack of like responsibility from the person who disappointed you. So I know sometimes the pressure of being a role model can feel like, oh, I need to be perfect. But I actually think presenting yourself as perfect or like in any way, politically, physically, emotionally, is actually really detrimental for the people that are looking up to you. And alienating. So I don't feel that pressure because I just refuse to feel it, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but would you say you don't feel pressured to be a manic pixie dream girl?
Yeah, no, I have though, in the past, mostly from lovers, not from my readership. Although I suppose the kind of nice thing about manic pixie dream girls is that they are inherently flawed. That's sort of their charm. So yeah, no, I don't feel pressured to be that, luckily.
Manic Pixie Dream Girl says, let's play make-believe with my body. I'll be a vintage dress and an empty prescription bottle. Good girl, just bad enough. A burp and a curtsy. Let me be not too pretty. Hair fried from all that pink dye. Sex when you need it. Puppet when you're bored. Let me build myself smaller than you. Let me apologize when I get caught acting bigger than you. Let me always wait for this. Let me work for this.
You tend to talk about and write about sensitive, difficult topics, and present it in a way that makes it easier for people to at least get the head around that the world is more than just Disney movies and happily ever after in black and white. Are there any topics you're not able to write about, where you think, well, I had this great idea for a poem or a story or whatever it might be, but I can't bring myself to write about it?
I think that I have familial dynamics in my life that I've never publicly written about. And most of that is because it's so complex. There's so many intersections of identity in my family, and I feel a really big responsibility to portray it in its wholeness. And I think I am capable of doing that. I also feel like I just want to be really responsible about when I do that and in what form, and because it's people's lives and it's people's identities beyond my own. And I don't feel an emotional block when it comes to writing about things, really. But I do think I have an awareness of I just want to get things right, and I think there are certain things that are easier to get right than others. And my relationships inside of my family are really complex, and they're complex to explain to my friends, so I don't like writing about it is I'll need to probably just write a whole book, and that is a big feat. And so I probably won't do that for many years, but that's kind of the only thing though. Everything else is free reign. Yeah, fair game. There you go. I was trying to remember the phrase.
I also read somewhere, might be attributing a false quote to you, but I heard somewhere doing research for this interview that poetry doesn't teach you how to finish a sentence. What does that, to break that sentence down, what does that mean to you?
So, that's interesting because it could be taken in so many ways. I think what I meant when I said that in a very literal sense is that when I set out to write this novel, one of the most difficult parts of it was quite embarrassing. It was that I was like, I don't know how to write sentences that lead one to the next. I don't know how to get a character from the living room to the bathroom. And it was like, I realized that I had been trained to think in fragments. Yeah. And I didn't, and you can write a novel that way. I didn't want to though. I was like, no, I want to write a novel that's really chronological and follows of really sort of A, B, C format. And maybe that's just because I'm like, I don't know why, but I didn't want to write in vignettes. I didn't want to write in fragments. And so I found it really hard. I sort of had to learn how to write while writing this novel. But I also think in an emotional sense, poetry is both liberating and also potentially, what's the word? Enabling, in that it doesn't teach you to finish a sentence, because I sometimes think poetry, I don't know that it always, in its best, it encourages us to grapple with ourselves and what we know and what we don't know. And in its worst, its lack of rules, I think sometimes can enable a certain amount of creative freedom that maybe is enabling. I don't know how to say this. I should be clear. I'm not really thinking about anyone else. I'm not judging anyone but myself, really. I'm thinking about my old poems and how sometimes like I wouldn't really go there, and I could just say, well, it's because it's a poem. Like it's my creative. This is like the way that I chose to express myself in this brief way. And I don't need to go any deeper, and I don't need to go any further because the poem is what it is. And it's not to say you can't do that in fiction or essays. Of course you can. Writers are some of the most manipulative people, but I guess there's a way that I started to feel like poetry wasn't challenging me to really challenge myself anymore. And I love poetry so much, but I think that is one side of it that if we're not careful can maybe lead to a sense of self-righteousness. I don't know. I'm like, am I going to get canceled for saying this? I don't know. But I guess, yeah, I think that I've been kind of at odds with my poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to touch on that, just to dig a very, very shallow rabbit hole here. What are your thoughts on cancel culture and at least we'll use an example of J.K. Rowling?
Sure.
Very famous author, has gotten in some rough weather the last couple of years.
Sure. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on cancel culture. I could literally write a dissertation on it at this point.
Please do.
I think I'll keep it sort of brief. I struggle with that phrase because in the US, at least, it's so associated with the right wing that it's like, it's one of those things that if you start to like talk about it, you're like criticizing cancel culture. And then like the person in the room is like, yeah, cancel culture is terrible, free speech. And you're like, wait, that's not what I meant, sort of thing. So I've taken to renaming it in just like disposability politics and moral perfectionism is what I've been calling it, because that's what about it I feel really critical of. I, to be honest, have not followed the J.K. Rowling thing that closely. No. It sounds to me like she has stood fairly like firm in her beliefs, and it sounds like people are rightfully critiquing those beliefs, and it seems like that's what's sort of happening. I guess the part of disposability that I don't agree with, I don't really believe J.K. Rowling has been disposed of. It sounds like she has like a fairly firm stance and that's and platform, and there is disagreement on that, and it doesn't seem like the same level of shaming that I guess I see sometimes. And I struggle with what disposability and moral perfectionism is doing to our ability to ask questions and grow and come from somewhere that isn't perfect and come from somewhere where we didn't learn everything right away. And I struggle with what that does to people's relationship to socializing. I think it's caused a lot of fear and shame. And from what I understand in teaching workshops on sexual assault, fear and shame does nothing for anyone. And in fact, can often create more violence. And I think we have to really question the ways that we respond to wrongdoing. And I don't think that being canceled is the same as going to prison, but I do think it's a valuable analogy to think about how we approach people as disposable. And we say, you did this thing, and so there's no coming back from that. You're the worst thing you've ever done. This is on your sort of track record forever. If we're all acknowledging that we're growing up in this place that's riddled with white supremacy and misogyny and transphobia and ableism, then we also have to reckon with the fact that many people are going to reflect those beliefs until they know better.
Yeah.
And I just want to give people a chance to know better, I guess, because I've seen people learn, and I've learned, and everyone I know has learned, and everyone I know is afraid of being canceled. And so if everyone you know is afraid of being canceled, and everyone is afraid that something that they said 10 years ago is going to come to light, and everyone is learning things new every day, then I don't know what the deflection is doing for any of us.
Yep.
If we're all kind of dealing with the same fears. Mm-hmm. So I have taken sort of a personal vow never to take part in that again. I won't take part in humiliating people on the internet, even if what they did hurt me. Because I just believe in that there's a different, more restorative approach that I would want people to give me. And so that's what I want to give people.
Yeah. Interviewed Lemony Snicket a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. How'd that go?
It was great. It was a lot nicer than I imagined him to be.
Yeah.
Sort of like a very sweet 50-year-old man, just sipping coffee and talking about literature. And not at all like the character in the books, of course, but he said one thing that came to mind right now, is that if he had written a series of unfortunate events today, he would most likely be cancelled right away. Mm-hmm. Because of the themes and how he approached violence and So I think times are changing and we are going in the right direction, but I think we are making a few detours along the way. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we are going in the right direction. And then there are, like you said, there are detours. I mean, those books meant so much to me as a child because they were brutal, you know, because kids are seeing things that are brutal. And it's really kind of disorienting as a kid to see all this violence and then be told it doesn't exist, or it's it's not reflected in any of the work you're consuming. And so that was so meaningful as a kid to see that darkness, you know? And I guess that's not to say that there's not room for criticism.
No.
I just wish there was more room for criticism and not this is totally does not have any value, you know? I wish that there was more nuance. Yeah.
Now, also, I might be completely wrong, but I also find that there's a difference between reading, I don't know, that's the top of my head, H.P. Lovecraft, who was a nasty piece of work and a racist and just a horrible example of a man. But you should be able at least to separate the author from the work and not necessarily canceling or disposing of something really impactful on your life and your upbringing just because someone tweeted something 10 years ago out of context.
And even sort of, I was talking to my boyfriend about this because I have always struggled with that, you know, where I stand with that, right? Is it's a really complex feeling to be I watched Annie Hall and I was I really like this and I like the woman in it. And I know that Woody Allen was it seems from what I have learned, a pretty fucked up dude, but also I liked his film and I was kind of what do I do with that? And my boyfriend said something that I thought was really smart. He said, and I think this is not far from what you're saying, even though it sounds like it is. He said, you can't separate the art from the artist. They are joined, but that is proof that people are complex, you know, a person who is deeply flawed, right, can create something that moves you. Yeah. And those two things can exist at once. And sometimes people's flaws or the violences that they commit are actually reflected in really interesting ways in their work. Like an example of that is Louis C.K., who before those allegations about him came out, I found a lot of his work around women was like really smart. And I was like, damn, he knew how to talk about misogyny in these ways that I really liked. And I thought he was really good at making jokes about how like absurd, violence against women is, and how like the mind of a misogynist is often so comical. And then these things came out and I was like, damn, like that's so wild. Like that part of why he was astute was about that mindset is because he was kind of living it. It's creepy and weird and it can feel really uncomfortable, but it's true, I don't know. So it's like H.P. Lovecraft, his work is really meaningful to you. And then he's also this person that you probably would not like. And what do you do with that? Yeah. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think your boyfriend is right in the fact that all works of art are sort of a product of the artist's imagination and subconscious in a way. I just don't feel that, at least in certain cases, doesn't hinder your ability to read just because the author is an asshole.
Yeah. And that's, I think a lot of people are really grappling with that with J.K. Rowling, because we all loved her books and her books, I don't think exhibited transphobia. No. It's not like they had trans characters, but they didn't feel like these like bioessentialist, weird propaganda works of fiction. But then she turned out to be quite transphobic, and that's really devastating, especially for trans readers. Yeah. And also her books are still her books. And I don't know. Yeah. I think it's important though, that we grapple with this. Yeah. I really do.
As long as something good comes out of it, I was going to say I won't stand in the way of it, but that sounds completely wrong. But let's just say that I hope we come out of it better than we were going into it. At least a few less monsters under our bed, so to say.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I have to switch gears a bit, talk about something a bit more pleasant. You mentioned you had role models that you looked up to when you were young. What sort of role models has shaped you in your writing?
I'll be honest. I think growing up, the biggest role models that I remember were like really random girls in my life. Like the older camp counselor, or these girls that lived at the end of my block, or, my friends' older sisters. And I think I just like really studied the way that they existed as girls and women. And I really admired them in just like for existing sometimes. Of course, I read a lot as a kid, and I loved stories about girls that seemed curious and brave, and I loved Harriet the Spy. I think I also kind of feverishly read anything my mom told me to read. Like I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings just because my mom told me to. And I loved thinking of my mom when she was young reading that. I liked like emulating that. But now my literary heroes feel like ancestors in these ways. You know, I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf in sort of the most original move of a millennial white woman. Yeah. But I am so moved by her like call to action at that time for something that feels so small but so significant, which is just a room. Yeah. And that I live alone, and that is just such a meaningful text to me. I wrote the foreword for Edna St. Vincent Millay's collected poems last year, and found so much kinship with her, reading about her as a traveling girl poet. So, you know, when I read Toni Morrison, I'm so like just fucking impressed by her how delicate and gentle she is, while tackling like such incredible, like profound, like political topics and around, you know, race and identity and gender. And so the fact that she wrote her first book when she was not old, but I think old to some of us. I don't know. Yeah. So now a lot of my literary heroes feel like ancestors or something.
Yeah. Great answer.
Thank you.
I think we're closing in on running out of time here, but I'll ask you a few more questions in closing here. That's not to say they will be easy to answer, but let's find out, shall we? Spørsmålet fra lytterne. I denne episoden hadde vi dessverre kun tid til ett spørsmål fra dere lyttere, men for et spørsmål det var. Som du får høre er det et tema bredt nok og viktig nok til å dedikere en hel episode til. Dette spørsmålet kom fra Agnete, og hun lurer på. As a fan of yours, I've noticed that a lot of your work is deeply personal, like my own. It gives the impression of being based on real experiences, blurring the line between writer and performer. Is this blurring intentional? And if so, how does it further your project as a feminist writer?
Wow. I think it is intentional. I think that I mostly write from pretty true experience, but I think poetry is inherently kind of surrealist, and I think memory is really surrealist. And so I think anytime we're writing from memory, we're also writing from a place of kind of magical realism, because like the idea of even having a memory feels really magical. Yeah. It feels really science fiction to like be disappearing into your own brain into the past. But I don't know how that furthers my work as a feminist writer. Maybe I think that's maybe the most true for my novel, which definitely blurs the lines between realism and sort of speculative fiction, and is very much about gender. And I think that sometimes, in the age of kind of tech and the internet and invention, and social media, I think womanhood specifically, beauty maybe more specifically, is very much like a space of invention at this point. And so I guess my novel really interrogates what it means to be invented as a woman, and in that way interrogates what it means to be real, you know? I don't know if that answers that question. To be honest, that question feels like there is very much a right answer to it, but I have to think about it for a while. But that's the best I can do.
Yeah. Also, that's just to have that clear, it's a great question. Also think that that's sort of a question we could spend a whole episode discussing.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
just to follow up on that, I might not be the correct person to ask you this, but do you see yourself as a feminist writer?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's fine that you asked me that. Yeah, I see myself as a feminist writer. I see. Yeah, I get that mindset of like, I'm not a feminist writer, I'm a writer, or like I'm not a woman pilot, I'm a pilot. I get that, I totally get it. But I just like being called that. I like being like called a girl.
It's not a dirty word.
My preference. Yeah.
And being open and outspoken poet in the age of social media was sort of dangers might be the wrong word to use, but what does that entail? And is it all roses and sunshine being so open and like she asked, the blur and the line between the person and the performer?
No, it's I really struggle with it, actually. I think that social media is progressively becoming like the most evil space for humans to exist inside of. I feel like I'm also progressively sounding more and more like a 55-year-old man who like lives in a Winnebago in Wyoming, but like this is truly how I feel right now.
That's very specific.
Yeah. I think that I think it's strange. I guess I've been posting a lot less on social media, and what I've been finding is part of the reason is that I do think of that as a performance space. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like performing all the time. And performance is not synonymous with dishonesty. A lot of performance is really genuine and true. And I think almost everything I post is true. Mm-hmm. It's just it's not the entirety of who I am. And sometimes I don't feel like cherry picking my identity and sort of, putting it on the internet. And so, and I struggle with what people are deducing based on what I put on the internet. And that's not out of fear. I mean, in kind of the other way, like, I think a lot of my life is not attractive. And so I don't really want to present it that way always, but I also don't want to like present my entire life to prove, I'm a real person. Like, I just sort of would rather not go on it, is how I feel sometimes. Yeah. And sometimes it's a really nice space, but for me personally, consuming it can feel really detrimental. Yeah. So I try to be aware of what I give people to consume.
I don't think that's the worst idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I also think that if George Orwell would write 1984 today, he would probably just post it on Facebook.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Wrapping up here, I want to present you with a quote again taken out of context, but not from you this time. I just want to give you get your immediate reaction to it. It's from Eve Ensler, the writer of the Vagina Monologues. Quote: "It seems to me that this is tyranny that's not accidental or incidental to make women feel compelled to look like somebody they're not." What's the first gut reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction is that I've never read the Vagina Monologues, but my second reaction is that I think that that's true. I think that I think making women feel, out of touch with how they look or in a constant state of aspiration, I think it really benefits like consumerism. I think it really benefits like a subservient dynamics. I think it benefits distraction. I think it's very distracting for women, I think. And I think distraction is really beneficial when it comes to monitoring power. And it's something I fall victim to a lot. And it's something that I want to challenge, not by way of saying, I don't think everything we do by choice is inherently feminist. And I think I want to interrogate my own reasons for doing things with regards to the way I look. But I think she's right.
Yeah. And Victoria's Secret is that she's going out of business.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
I would be a terrible host if I kept you in longer, but I would also be equally a terrible host if I didn't give a call to action to my listeners. Your novel is due to be to hit bookstores this year. Whoever you are, honey, when can people read it, and what do you want your readers to grasp from it?
The book actually probably won't be out till 2023 now. I need to kind of announce that. I haven't yet. Turns out it takes a long time to write a book.
Yeah. Who knew?
Yeah. But in the event it comes out, which it will, just might be a little longer. I want my readers to, I don't know. I don't think there will be very many surprises. And I say that in a good way. The book is very different from anything I've written, but it's very me. So, I don't know. I guess I kind of want people to just go into it. I don't really want to prepare them.
Yeah. Then, let's try to do another recording once the novel is out, and we can talk more about it then.
Yes.
We've discussed a lot of things during this episode. Not a lot about poetry, but the woman behind the poetry.
It's all about poetry.
It's been a huge pleasure spending my evening, your morning with you across the ocean. And it's been a pleasure having you as a guest finally, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Du har hørt på en episode av Portrettpodden, en podcast med meg, Mats Lasse-Jangås, og min gjest i denne episoden var poet Olivia Gatwood. Min takk til Olivia for at hun tok seg tid til å være med. Har du gjort noen tanker mens du har hørt på? Har du ris eller ros eller tips som skulle komme, kan du rette til Portrettpodden sine Facebook-sider, eller på e-post til portrettpodden@gmail.com. Alle lydklippene i denne episoden er benyttet under sitatrett. Portrettpodden arbeider i henhold til Vær varsom-plakatens regler for god presseskikk. Tips gjerne venn eller to om denne episoden, og husk at du kan støtte Portrettpodden på Patreon. Takk for at nettopp du hørte på, og vi høres snart igjen.